Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by the executive leadership team at Be Direct. How are you doing today, gentlemen?
Good.
Fantastic. How are you, Tony?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Now, could you please start by introducing yourself so we know who everyone is?
I'm Larry Yon, founder of Be Direct.
Henri Ward, COO.
And Andre Ward, Chief Cultural Officer.
Thank you. Now, Larry, I've known you for a while now. I know you're a serial entrepreneur and you're back and forth, between Africa and the States quite a bit. Could you tell us what Be Direct is?
I'm an Afripreneur. I like to say I have so many different things that I like to do and engage with Africans and African businesses all throughout the continent. But Be Direct is the first US-based company that's focused on board prep and identifying paid board opportunities for US Black executives and entrepreneurs. We were extremely intentional about building out a model that had a board prep program that took into consideration that success in the US didn't necessarily guarantee success on the continent of Africa. And we wanted to make sure that we helped our board candidates adapt their experiences they've had in the US to be able to be maximized in a positive way on the continent of Africa with engaging with African businesses on the continent.
And what was it that inspired the idea?
Probably for the last 17 years, I've been doing a lot of work across the continent. Whether I'm working with corporations here in the US or middle-sized enterprises here in the US and helping them expand to the continent, whether it's working on the continent with businesses who want to expand here to the US. I've had the opportunity to work with monarchs. I've had the opportunity to work with embassies and VCs and a lot of different influencers and high net worth individuals on the continent of Africa. But one of my most fulfilling experiences on the continent was always trips where I was taking African Americans over to the continent to do business, right? And in that process, not necessarily focusing on the commerce, but just being able to see them engage in Africa for the first time and have conversations with people on African soil was always a very fulfilling experience for me. And those conversations were, coming into it, they were a lot of misconceptions about the other, right, on the African side and on the African American side, and seeing those walls uncovered, seeing that realization of commonality. The experiences to colonialism and slavery and the distrust of government, all of those good things came out in those conversations. And it was at that point that business was able to be done. So, that was really the birth of really looking at developing this model with Be Direct. We clearly have a problem here in the US with kind of traditional network-based board placement. And seeing where Africa is in its trajectory, it was quite easy and natural for us to want to be able to really connect cultures and to be able to provide the support necessary for African businesses to be able to scale at the pace necessary for them.
Thank you. And speaking of the support, Andre, could you describe what the board prep program looks like?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, it is delivered in three different aspects. First and foremost, it's really about helping Black executives understand that we have a particular point of view. We have a particular Westernized thinking process about business. We have a particular value system that is driven about our decision making and problem solving and scaling economics. Those are skill sets. But the complexity around that is really around those values and behaviors that come out when you think about whether or not that is transferable to the African continent. And they may not be. Skill sets are but the value systems may not be, and the decisions by which we make those decisions, the values by which we make those decisions, are driven by how we've been raised. And so we look at our own cultural intuitive dexterity. And what I mean by dexterity is our ability to be flexible, our ability to not be as rigorous and rigid about how we think about business and what drives our decision making around business. The second is that we've actually partnered with two very well-known and capable partners on the continent that help understand that governance is different on the continent. And where we may be driven by legislative governance, and while we might be driven by other types of Sarbanes-Oxley and other types of regulatory matters, on the continent, it is still regulatory, but the ethical challenges and the ethics are regulated differently. And they're much more complex. And so we've partnered with very capable organizations on the continent that will help teach what that governance model looks like. And then the third is around coaching. I've always believed that no matter how well you perform, whether it is in business acumen or whether it is in athletics, everybody needs a coach. Everyone needs someone to help hone those skills to bring out the best in you, even when you believe you are already a high performer. And so we have identified a coaching provider that not only knows African governance structures and models, but is also a certified coach. And they will assist us in putting this entire package together.
Interesting. Now, Henri, could you share your thoughts on the importance and the benefits of knowledge sharing between African entrepreneurs on the continent and Black professionals in the diaspora?
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at our offering, we look at it from a bifurcated perspective. And what I mean by that is, what are the benefits both for Black executives who are in the diaspora, as well as what are the benefits for African companies? And from the African companies perspective, we are very much focused on making sure that we help and support talented entrepreneurs and future unicorns on the African continent. We want to make sure that people on the continent are viewed not just as consumers of product, but also as producers of products as well. We know that research tells us that 48% of unicorns come from the United States. 25% of unicorns come from China, and the remaining 27% come from other parts of the world. And we just believe it's Africa's time to grow and expand. We also know that good corporate governance provides good financial performance and also provides strong profitability. And with that in mind, we believe that partnering Black executives in the diaspora with companies on the continent will produce a very good output, produce a very good product in terms of strong, profitable businesses that can grow both locally and globally. Here's something else. When we look at determinants of growth, traditionally, economies have looked at determinants of growth in terms of natural resources, right? You think of oil in Nigeria, you think of gold and diamonds in South Africa. Now what we're finding is institutional strengths are considered from a modern economic growth perspective, institutional strengths are considered those economic growth factors. At the core of that is strong corporate and making sure that board work is being done effectively. And as Andre said, making sure that the cultural diversity aspect, the cultural dexterity aspect of that is keenly put in place, because the reality is you can't take a Western trained person, no matter how smart they are, place them on a corporate board in another country and expect them to be successful, because they just will not.
Thank you. Larry, how would you say Be Direct is different from other board search firms?
I mean, it's a number of reasons. I think some of them we've touched on already, you know, with our interest of targeting geographies outside of the US is one, right? The other clear differentiator can be associated with our reach of our board prep to, you know, extend beyond traditional means or typical means of board governance. But then once we get beyond that, we start to think about this. There's this challenge in the US where if you aren't at a certain executive level and in a certain network, you're not even on the pathway to be on a paid board. You might be able to get on a nonprofit board or a local board in your community, but you're really not on that particular pathway of being on that paid board in most cases. Our program pulls on the interest of a number of different stakeholders to be successful. One obviously is the benefit to the board candidate, that in a lot of senses, it's going to be able to be, it's going to accelerate their exposure and their access to the information that makes them valuable, not just to African boards, but also makes them valuable to US boards. And that's why we don't see ourselves as competitors with a lot of the great organizations that have been doing a lot of good work as of late to diversify corporate boards here in the US. But when you think about the African businesses that would be looking to accept in US board candidates, the value, the access to the networks, the access to the information, the ability to improve their ecosystems and strengthen their infrastructure to build and scale businesses fast is a value proposition that we are proud of, that we're offering to be able to engage with businesses on the continent. And then if you're thinking about, you know, US corporations that are looking to expand their inclusion initiatives with their Black executives or their vendors within their entrepreneurs within their supply chain, there's an opportunity for US corporates to develop a better appreciation of the continent of Africa as well, and leveraging the skill sets and the on the ground access that individuals that are rock stars within their workforce would be very would go a long way for being able to help them understand and be aware of how they can engage on the continent, and how they can be a part of this new global economy that has to include the continent of Africa, just based on, you know, sheer size and population, working age, and things of that nature.
Thank you. And what should US executives consider when taking on a board role in Africa, Andrea?
I think one of the challenges that really is resonating with folks is this notion that we've called cultural economics. So when you think about cultural economics, you think about, as Larry was indicating, in relationship to board placement, those are aspirational positions, right? Mm-hmm. Most of us want to aspire to be paid in addition for our skill set, for our intellect, for our knowledge, for our ability to grow businesses and grow them at scale, and to assist other people to do the same. And so while Larry was speaking about US corporates, I'm going to add an additional context to that. That could also be the same true for Black entrepreneurs in the US who are looking to also expand their markets as well. And so when you think about what it takes to be on a board and what it means to sit on a board, and the governance versus the doing, the operational, the policy, the direction, the market share growth, looking at what it takes to scale a company, grow a company, and then take that company into a market and in new markets. For the US, as Larry had indicated, there are 54 countries on the continent of Africa. And in many of our US corporates and in many of our US entrepreneur relationships, we've only been looking at the United States, 50 states, and maybe North America. And there's an entire world out there. Relationship building is absolutely essential and key. It is not just about what you think and how you think and your ability to have a level of expertise. It is also about your ability to connect at a different type of intuitive level in relationship building that allows persons of the continent to not just trust your decisions, but trust your intentions. And that is significantly different than a model that we may be referencing from a US-based centric perspective.
Interesting. And Henri, are there any regions? So you've mentioned many countries in Africa that you're going to be targeting. I guess my question is, one, which countries in Africa are you going to target and why? And then the second part of that question is, are there any countries outside of the continent that are of interest to you also?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, we're going to start out with 3 countries, South Africa, Ghana, and Kenya. We feel for several different reasons, those are great places for us. One, those are places where relationships already exist with VCs, PEs, and privately held companies, along with governmental relationships. And so those are markets that we believe will be easier for us to make impact in. Outside of that, we are looking at going to other countries on the continent, whether that be Tanzania, Ethiopia, countries also on the western side of the continent as well.
Okay. And outside of Africa, are there any considerations for China, Europe, or?
Yeah, so that would be nice, but for right now, we are actually just very focused on the continent of Africa. We believe, we truly believe that socially, culturally, economically, we can make a very strong impact on the continent of Africa. We believe that Africans in the diaspora, whether they be, and we specifically say Black executives, by the way, not African American executives, because if you are a person of Haitian descent or Jamaican descent, you don't consider yourself an African American, but you do consider yourself an African in the diaspora. And so we believe that Africans in the diaspora can make a major impact on the African continent. We believe that there is such growth going on the African continent that there is sufficient work there to be done that we really don't have to look outside of the continent.
And this question,
Might
yes,
I
please.
add one additional thing to that as well? it's a two-way street in relationship, right? So it is not just about the exportation of Black talent into and onto the continent of Africa. What we have discovered, and certainly through Larry's nearly 2 decades of working on the continent, and my nearly 2 decades of working on and off the continent in various countries, African businesses are looking for that connection. They are longing for that natural, biological, genealogical, and geographical connection of Black talent on the continent. And so while we talk about what may be additional plays of exploration, these are natural relationships. And these are also some of the most fastest growing countries, not only on the continent, but in terms of their ability to compete and not be thought of as third world or second world. They are some of the fastest growing countries on the planet that have been overlooked because of what Henri said earlier, because they were only looked at for natural resources and not their abilities to play in the larger global market across a ton of other industries and disciplines.
And just to add on to what Andre said, research tells us that by 2050, 1 out of 4 people on the globe will be on the African continent. So we know that there's a market there. One of the other things I want to emphasize, which is based on the question that you asked Andre earlier, even though we have Africans in the diaspora and Africans on the continent, we are culturally very different, which is why we want to make sure that folks who are participating in our program understand that it's just not about getting technical skill sets regarding corporate governance, but it really is about understanding that culturally, when you go to a different country, and as Larry was talking about during his introduction, in which he's led business initiatives where it was that person's first time on the African continent. That will be the same for many of the folks coming through our program. It will be their first time on the African continent. And so we want to make sure that they understand that just because you may happen to be the same skin hue, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the cultural dexterity to be able to navigate properly within a business environment there, because they are 2 different things. Many folks would have been to Europe. Many folks may have been to the Asian continent. They may have done business in China. They may have done business in Japan or some other Asian country. And probably the closest would be doing business in Asia, where it's all about relationships, right? It's not just about the mechanics of business, but it's about the relationship building before I'm ready to do business with you. And so that's a crucial part of our programming aspect, which is why, we will not recommend someone on the executive search firm piece of the business until they've gone through the training, even though they may think they're ready, until they actually understand those nuances, and even in-country nuances, right? There are nuances even between factions within countries. And so all of those things play themselves out. And as Andre said before, Larry, our founder, has been doing business on the continent for over a decade. And so he clearly understands those nuances, because he's had to work through them in his capacity.
Well, I think that added on to both of those pieces in terms of the training program that we haven't talked about yet, because we talked about the governance piece. We've talked about what people would consider still kind of in class, if you will, aspects of cultural dexterity and that perspective. But there are other pieces of part of this board prep program that's extremely unique. One, we have partnered with two very good companies to help us in terms of governance and leadership training and things of that nature on the continent of Africa. But they'll also have, the board candidates will also have access to master classes with African business executives as part of this board prep program. We'll be scheduling immersion trips. So it's not just virtual, it's not just classroom based, where you get a chance to see Africa from African soil, right? It's one thing to Google it, if you will. It's one thing to talk about it. It's a completely different experience to actually feel it, right? To actually see it, to actually go to places and see Africa's complexity, and the complexity of unique opportunity and complexity of challenge, right? You have to see it, you have to feel it, and going to varying different places across the continent, it gives you a wonderful opportunity for U.S. executives to broaden what they think about Africa. The generation that they came up in, many of them, creates great misconceptions in their mind that might still actually exist. And we want executives within the program to develop a certain level of appreciation and a certain level of authenticity for seeing African businesses grow, build local value chains, be able to scale to other countries on the continent, and to be able to globalize, right? And not coming in with the Western perception that everything that we say is right, or everything that we say is better, and that everything that's the best solutions are coming from the US, right? We want them to be able to have an approach to their ability to provide advice and guidance to business executives on the continent in a way that is coming from a place of authenticity, and not I guess just the certain level of cockiness, right, that most of our executives had to have in order to be successful in the US, right? So I mean, those are all types of cultural dynamics that make us special in the US to be able to deal with what we have to deal with on a normal basis. But there are different aspects of our experiences that we have to be able to tap into to be successful with having what we like Andre said, kind of really connecting culture to economics on the continent.
No, that's very important. Another question that came to mind was, are you focusing on any specific industries, or is this like industry agnostic when it comes to the board seats?
It is industry agnostic. However, it is industry agnostic. However, there are very specific industries on the continent that are growing faster than others. And so technology space is growing astronomically. Fintech, textiles and fashion,
Ag tech,
healthcare.
Ag tech,
Say again?
yes.
ag tech,
Yeah.
agriculture.
Yes.
Tourism,
And so when you manufacturing, right? And so manufacturing. And so when you think about these types of disciplines, it allows us then to source candidates who not only have been in those industries historically, but also there may be supply chain level relationship, even though they may not have a direct relationship to the discipline or to the actual identity of the business itself. It may be supply chain related. And so that's why we wanted to source Black executives from a very broad range of disciplines, from a broad range of backgrounds and company experiences. And it's also why we've included entrepreneurs in this process. Because for Black entrepreneurs, many times we are not necessarily seen as partners on larger global scales. We are seen as participants in the lower supply chain, but not as independent thinkers of governance into how to scale businesses. And there are tons of businesses in the US that have gone from startup to cross the $1 million and the 10 million and the 50 million and the $100 million threshold in a rapid period of time. That kind of process is happening on the continent just because of the explosiveness of their customer base. And when you think about a country that is as large as South Africa or Kenya, which has one of the fastest growing middle classes on the planet, those types of economic decisions help us to think more broadly about who would be a great fit as a candidate.
I'll add just one small piece to that. I mean, when you think about African businesses, right, and you know, unless you are a business in Nigeria, right, where the population is just so massive, many of the if you have a business in many of the other countries, in order for you to be able to scale to a certain size and a certain level of growth, you have to be able to engage in other geographies, across other countries, across country borders, right? And when we think about entrepreneurs as board candidates in the US, many of them, though they may not have done business in Africa, they have gone through the business life cycle, right? And on the continent, with very new businesses in some regard that are growing very fast, it's very easy for them to overlook certain aspects of the life cycle that they haven't been through yet, right? And or they come from markets that don't have fully developed ecosystems, or if they come from markets that are missing certain infrastructural things that allow them to be able to develop and sell products and services across border, right? So that level of experience, though it might be US based or European based or Caribbean based, et cetera, in the US, again, we're going to go back to being able to adapt that experience in a way where it's of value to businesses across the continent.
Do the board members have the option of working remotely, or does it have to be, they have to be on site?
They do have the option of working remotely, right? You know, I guess that's one of the good things that came out of COVID, right? That there may not have been many, but one of the good things that came out of COVID is people are used to and accustomed to and comfortable with being able to work remotely. Clearly, we want the opportunities, and we're going to facilitate the opportunities for board members to actually get on the ground and be in Africa. But when those opportunities present itself for them to be able to provide their expertise, whatever it may be, and doing it in a remote fashion, they do have the capability and the ability to be able to do that, right? And when you think about what these board members are bringing to a board, in terms of information share, in terms of access to new markets, in terms of information to access new markets, and information on being compliant, and all those varying different pieces of business that allow you to be able to scale at pace. These are things that can definitely be communicated virtually, right? And that level of trust, and having that level of global trust allows us to be able to make sure that we are actually maximizing the power of our respective cultures.
Thank you. And for the executive who wants the opposite, they actually they're like, hey, I'm ready to pack my bags and move. What type of resources or assistance do you offer to enable like a soft landing, so to speak?
That becomes part of our ecosystem, right? Because we are creating ecosystems that include Africa and its US diaspora, there are a number of wonderful companies that handle aspects of that handle corporate travel, that handle relocation services that handle hospitality and tourism. I mean, I think those things, that's actually an easy part of the process in terms of helping individuals feel comfortable and give them the access to the information and the resources necessary to be able to make that decision. At the end of the day, programs like what Be Direct is putting forward, one of the major value propositions that we have, when you asked earlier in terms of our differentiators, that we're providing options, right? And options to be able to generate wealth, options to be able to extend our actual business networks, and options of being able to be a part of ecosystems as in a valuable role as a key resource. And that's not something that African businesses or Black Americans actually get the opportunity to do at a very high level.
And Tony, just to add on to what Larry just said, you know, as I'm having conversations with folks, and as these two gentlemen are having conversations with folks about our program, you know, one of the things that is our key differentiator, as Larry said, is the fact that we're, you know, our tagline is more tables, more seats, right? We're not trying to create more slices of the same pie, right? Right. What we're trying to do is create more pies, right? We're creating more opportunities, not trying to slice up the current opportunities into smaller pieces, right? So for the target market that we're going after for Black executives, many of those folks are not getting the opportunity, whether it's because of networking purposes or other things. They're not getting the opportunities to add value from a paid board perspective. And so we are creating more tables, which by definition creates more seats for them to be able to sit at more tables.
Understood.
And if I might take that step one further, it will accelerate their ability to actually have greater exposure.
That's right.
At a much different level than maybe an EVP or an SVP or C-suite. By being a VP or being a director level, they then can take that resume building experience on the continent and now leverage it back on to the continental US. And so now I have become more competitive, even among those who you thought I was not even a sourced candidate for.
That's right. Yeah, our target market for Black executives, as Andre said before, definitely entrepreneurs, but also Black executives primarily at the vice president level and above. Now, of course, you know, we also know that, you know, a senior director of of $150 billion corporation has the same responsibility as perhaps a vice president of a $1 billion company or a $500 million company. So we understand kind of the rationalization of titles and take that into consideration as well. But our primary target audience is vice president and above, because we feel that particularly at the VP to SVP level, they have the executive leadership experience to be able to add value as a corporate board member, but are not necessarily getting the opportunity in the United States to do that.
And many of them, because of their level and role, might already be reporting into and giving presentations at board level.
Absolutely.
So they are already having interactions with governance.
Absolutely.
They're just not at the table as a part of that governance body.
That's right. I actually, to that specific example, I actually had a conversation this past week with a potential candidate for our upcoming cohort, who is at the senior vice president level. She is actually senior vice president in a financial services company, who actually presents on a regular basis to her corporate audit committee. So she has very strong working relationships right now with her corporate board. As a matter of fact, she's the person that prepares the deck for corporate audit, right? However, even with that, she's not getting necessarily the opportunity herself to sit on a corporate board, although she is preparing the decks for audit committee.
Interesting.
I think I want to add a piece to that too. I mean, you know, this idea in terms of the power of the tagline, more tables, more seats, right? In reality, and again, this is, you know, there are organizations across the country that have done a very good job of bringing attention to there not being enough seats at U.S. board tables for Black executives. They've done a good job of, you know, as best they can, increasing the percentage of board directors in the states that are Black. But in reality, you know, there exists this idea that, you know, it's a pipeline problem, right? And it's not a pipeline problem. You know, for S&P 500 companies, many of those directors sit on average at least 2 boards. And when you think about even the Black executives that actually are on boards themselves, corporate boards themselves, many of them sit on multiple boards, right? So in you know, by you know, number, there's not a pipeline problem because the number of Black business executive talent with extremely advanced business acumen easily outsizes the number of board opportunities, easily, right? And as Henri kind of alluded to, we're already started to receive you know, applications and recommendations just from us telling people what we're going to do, from people that are complete dynamos in their industries as entrepreneurs or executives. And they're nowhere close to being in conversations on being on a paid board in the US. So it's not a pipeline problem, it's an opportunity problem. And we just need to give them the opportunity to be able to leverage their networks, to be able to leverage their expertise at the paid board level. And we want to be able to be a bridge for them to be able to understand how to culturally and commercially engage on the continent of Africa, where, you know, there's endless possibility and opportunity for the skill sets here in the US if they're adapted properly to you know, the needs of the African markets.
What is the long-term vision for Be Direct?
I mean, are we starting over? Are we starting the clock over again? Because I mean, that's a long answer.
What is the short version?
But I think in short, right, in the fewest amount of words, I think at the end of the day, Be Direct wants to be recognized as a key resource for building and supporting, you know, not just African unicorns, right? This idea of being a unicorn, you know, it sounds great, and you're you know, huge, and you're able to create lots of jobs and that sort of thing, but we also want to be a resource for those businesses that are really looking to be Pan-African, right? And they're looking to be global, to have global scale. We want to be a resource that's key for building, helping them build the infrastructure and the ecosystem that makes that necessary. And we want to be able we want Black Americans and African businesses to see value in each other at scale, right? Not just those exceptional businesses that have the ability to extend themselves to the US, or those forward-thinking US entrepreneurs or executives here that have the ability to engage on that have had the ability to engage on the continent. We want to be able to see this activity done at scale, create enough success stories. We're going to be doing case studies on our work to connect culture and economics. And we want to be an example that it's possible to be able to inspire young entrepreneurs, to be able to inspire young entrepreneurs to think that it's possible, and to think about being Pan-African and thinking about think about being able to be global as your first versions of your business model, your business plan drafts, not as something that's aspirational that you can get to in the future.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Well said. So for all the executives who are interested in learning more, what is the application process and where can they find out more information about how to get on board with your program?
Yeah, so we ask that they go to our website, which is Global Board Director. That's one long word, globalboarddirector.com. There, we also ask that they take a look at the video that we placed out there that kind of gives more insight into the conversations that we've just had. And if they are a Black executive, we ask that they click on the U.S. candidate button on the website, and that will take them to the application process. And they can click apply and fill in the information there. For those that are corporations on the African continent who would like for us to work with them as well in terms of sourcing Black executive talent, we ask that they go to the website as well, globalboarddirector.com. Click on the button that says African corporates and apply as well.
Thank you. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your work. Definitely important stuff, very mission aligned with what I have in mind in terms of bridging the resource and the cultural and the economic gap that exists between business owners and executives on the continent and those in the diaspora. So more power to you, and I wish you all the greatest of success.
Appreciate
Thanks
that.
so much for the opportunity.
You got an amazing network, Tony, and definitely want to give you your flowers for putting together a platform like this, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's been times where everyone has wanted to support Black businesses and not had a platform where they could actually find them, right? Or hear about them or see them or get to know them. So definitely hats off to you, and give you your roses for putting this platform together. The access that even you have to the entrepreneurs that you've been interviewing for years, at this point, are individuals that can be board candidates and yourself, right? I think that on the continent, there is an initiative to create a new narrative for Africa, right? And an opportunity for Africa to be able to present itself to the world. And you have, even as a board candidate yourself, you have the opportunity to be able to share a lot of information from years of being able to market businesses, right? I mean, if you think about that as a skill set, I mean, that is a knowledge base and a discipline that could be valued on the continent as well from a business perspective. So, definitely thank you for this opportunity. We look for being able to continue to give updates as well to how successful the program is being, and we look forward to continually engaging with you in that process.
Yes, indeed. Looking forward to hearing the progress and updates myself. So thank you all again, and you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.